I remember writing a column on a Sunday, the week of the Combine, when there was starting to be some chatter about it, that the Denver Broncos should consider trading Clinton Portis for Champ Bailey on a Sunday. And I flew back to Denver that day, and I remember Bobby Turner, the Broncos running backs coach at the time, who's now the running backs coach with the 49ers. He was on my plane, and we got into the monorail together in Denver, and he gets the newspaper, and he's looking down, and he's looking at the article, and he looks at me, he's looking at the article, and he looks at me, and he goes, "Where do you come up with this shit from?" And the very next day, the Broncos made the trade.
That's unbelievable.
For Champ Bailey.
The Field Talk podcast is presented by Rhoback. If you've ever seen me, you have probably seen me in Rhoback gear. I'm rocking the polo. I love all the different designs that they have. They've got solids, they've got stripes, and they've got really fun ones like the one that I am wearing right now. But Rhoback has so much more than that. They've got tees. They've got, of course, the signature hoodies, hats, joggers, shorts, heck, different kinds of shorts these days. I can tell you this, when you're wearing Rhoback, you are comfortable. So head over to rhoback.com. That's RHOBACK.com, and use the promo code FIELD. That's my name, FIELD, FIELD, for 20% off your first offer. If you live on the world of Twitter, or really any platform for social media, you might well follow Adam Schefter. He is amongst the most prolific reporters, regardless of subject and regardless of area in the world. He is the man who is known as the most plugged-in NFL reporter, the most popular sport in the United States. And it seems like every time I turn, he's got a new, huge story that he is dropping. And while that's been the Adam Schefter that a lot of people have known for quite some time, the truth is that Adam Schefter was somebody who never knew he was going to get into this line of work when he was a high school student. So to learn more about what made Adam Schefter who he is today, he joined us here on the Field Talk podcast. So here's Adam Schefter, and we're going to dive into his journey and how he becomes the man who, with just one tweet, can send the football world into a tizzy. It is an honor to be joined by a man that I'm very fortunate to call a great friend, Adam Schefter, who you may know probably from a major NFL story involving your team. But I want to start with the most important question maybe I've ever asked you, Schefter. How much money have you made off of your appearance in The Longest Yard?
It's funny you say that. I actually, in my wallet right now, I have a check that I need to go cash. It's a royalty, but it's not for The Longest Yard because I get one every quarter, it seems like, but I got a royalty check in my wallet right here for The Simpsons, for my appearance on The Simpsons for $8.84 that I need to go cash. So I'm going to go do that. And I'm going to go buy myself a nice green matcha latte from Starbucks with it, I think.
That is well done. So just to be clear, does $8.84 cover like each time the episode simulcast? Or is that like over the course of a year? How long ago did you receive a check prior to this one?
Well, I've gotten probably a few checks for The Simpsons. I've voiced over a few lines in one episode, playing myself. But The Longest Yard, which I appeared in sometime, I would guess sometime around 2000, the year 2000. When did the movie come out, The Longest Yard?
I believe it was 2005, which was my,
okay, yeah, you know what? That would actually make sense. That would make sense. Okay, so 2005, they rounded up a bunch of sports reporters at the time to be in this movie, and their idea was, okay, we'll put these guys in a press box scene, and then they're going to all write about it. It's going to be great publicity for the movie. And since then, I think they paid us at that time like $1,000 each, if I'm not mistaken. But more important, they flew us out for the premiere. And I remember at the time, I had just started working for NFL Network, and I got out of the car, and everyone at the Mann's Chinese Theater in LA they're all yelling, Adam, Adam, Adam. I'm like, I can't believe this many people watch NFL Network. Like, it was shocking to me. And then I turned around and realized that Adam Sandler was right behind me, and they weren't calling for me. They were calling for Adam Sandler. But I've been getting royalty checks. I probably get 3-4 checks a year for royalties for The Longest Yard. I don't think any one of them's been bigger than $7.34. I probably make a good $20 a year in royalties over the last 15 or so years. So I've probably made, I don't know, a couple $100 in royalties from The Longest Yard.
Well, I guess it's better than nothing, Shefty. And so you've been confused, maybe not confused, but you've been in the proximity of Adam Sandler when people were calling for Adam. Famously, according to your own podcast, you had the mix up with Scotty Scheffler. Your name, both first and
That was
last name,
pretty
has
good.
led to quite some confusion. Yes, for those that have missed that story, go check it out on Adam Schefter's podcast, which is always a must listen for football fans. And Shefty, well, I would imagine almost any football fan knows your name or knows your reporting. I don't know how many of them know how you became the man who is synonymous with the term NFL insider. And I know you're going to be too humble and modest to agree with that assessment. But as the host of this podcast, I can say it, and I can say it with absolute certainty. But I wanted to see if we can kind of track the roots of how you became the person that you are now. You grew up in New York on Long Island. What did Adam Schefter want to be when he was a high school student thinking about the future of his life?
Not this. I had no idea. This is something that was so far beyond my scope of imagination that I couldn't have imagined it. My family had a family five and dime type business, small little mom and pop shops. My grandfather and parents helped run them. And I just thought, okay, safe, easy. I'm going to work in the family business. If I can't do that, it just seemed like everybody that was going to college back then would either go to law school or business school. And the idea of becoming any sort of sports reporter was something that was so cool and so foreign and so distant and so unimaginable to me that I really never even thought about it in high school. And in fact, I was at a ceremony at my high school where they put me and Steve Levy, who also went to my high school, into the Belmore John F. Kennedy Wall of Fame. And he was retracing his path to where he is today. And I was blown away at the thought process, the organization, the vision, all these plans that he had laid out from the time that he was in high school and college to where every summer he was doing an internship for, ESPN New York Radio, WFAN, a sports agent, a local TV station. Like, he knew exactly what he wanted to do and he set out to do it. I did none of that. He did all the right things. I did all the wrong things. And it was amazing to me to listen to his path to get to where he is today, as the great host, anchor, play-by-play man that he is today. And again, Field, it was so different than anything that I thought. I really thought I would go into the business and sell dish soap and flip-flops, and that would be the way that I would make my living. That's what my grandfather did. That's what my parents did. I even when I was, and I haven't said this to very many people, like when I was in college, I would take my father's merchandise and I would go around Detroit and I would sell it to try to make some extra pocket money for me, some money for the business. I would do that in the summers. I would be a salesman selling, like I said, dish soap. I'm trying to think, cocoa butter, oil, and so that's what I thought I would do. And then when I got to Michigan, my first year, freshman year, I rushed for a fraternity. There were about 50, 60, 70 of us trying to get in. They took 10, 12 people. I didn't get in. So I went down to the football office to see if they needed somebody to hand out jock straps and pick up water bottles, or pick up jock straps and hand out water bottles. They didn't. So I went down to the basketball office to see if they needed somebody. They didn't. And I'm like, okay, well, I can't get into the fraternity. I can't get a job as some peon with the football team or basketball. What can I do? And the student newspaper turned away nobody. They took on everybody. And so that was what I wound up doing, only because it was the last option and only because the Michigan Daily said no to nobody. So I started writing on a whim my freshman year of college, not setting out to do that when I went to Michigan, not thinking that I was going to do that when I went to Michigan, and just starting out to give myself something to do, to spend time while all my friends got into the fraternity and I didn't, while all my friends were working and I didn't have one. I'm like, well, I got to do something. And that's how it started.
Well, I don't know that I can retrace your entire social life in Michigan, but having met some of your friends that are still friends to this day, whether it was at your 50th birthday party or your daughter Dylan's bat mitzvah, I can say it's a great group of guys. And clearly you guys had a lot of fun during your time in college. So you go from Michigan to Northwestern for journalism school, Shefty. which I would say for most people sounds like a fairly conventional path for somebody who wants to get into this world that we are now in. But then after Northwestern, I'm assuming you have to face the challenge that most people face, which is what the heck do I do next? So where do you land from there?
Well, you bring up Northwestern and you say it's a conventional path, but the only reason that I went to Northwestern for 1 year to get my master's degree, and it was a 1 year program in Evanston, Illinois, was because while I was working at Michigan, at the Michigan Daily, and I was working on the weekends for the Ann Arbor News covering high school sports and the Detroit Free Press as a stringer, getting quotes from Michigan football and basketball games and being a research assistant for Mitch Albom and hustling to do anything I could. While I was doing all those things at Michigan, I was sending out literally hundreds of resumes to every newspaper across the country, and there wasn't a single one that offered me a job, not one.
Wow.
And if I had gotten a job offer anywhere in South Dakota, North Dakota, Idaho, Wyoming, Louisiana, I was going to go wherever I got a job. Nobody offered me a job. And when nobody offered me a job with nothing else to do again, I went to Northwestern to bide my time, to get my master's degree in journalism, to work on the side covering high school sports and fencing and wrestling and volleyball and all the things that other reporters didn't want to do for the Chicago Tribune. So while I got my master's, I got more experience at the Chicago Tribune. Again, this was not the plan. This was sort of my last option. And then when I was graduating with my master's, I got an internship in Seattle at the Seattle Post-Intelligencer. The Goodwill games were coming to Seattle that summer, and they hired me to cover the Goodwill games. And while I was there, I was sending out more resumes and more letters for more jobs, and there were more and more rejection letters. It was 2 solid years of hundreds of rejection letters, and it was only when I got home from my internship in Seattle the first week in September in 1990 that the Los Angeles Times called to offer me a job in one of their bureaus covering high school sports. And when I went out celebrating that night with my friends, because I was going to take any job that came my way, and it happened to be with the Los Angeles Times covering high school sports in a bureau in the Valley. When I went out celebrating, I got back and there was a message, and I can still see it to this day on a little purple note from my mother that said, Barry Forbes, Rocky Mountain News, 303-892-5326 on my pillow. And I called Barry Forbes that morning. He said, could you come out to Denver and interview for a job? I'm like, how soon? He said, could you come today? Called my mom, and I was on a 10:30 a.m. flight that morning out to Denver, Colorado, where I had no great experience, no real connections. Flew out, interviewed for the job, stayed overnight. Denver in 1990 was not the city that it is today. It was a totally different place. It was like a dusty old cow town. And he was driving me to the airport in the morning, and I'm like, do I get the job? He's like, you got the job. I'm like, oh my God, what am I going to be doing? Well, you're going to cover a little bit of the Denver Broncos, a little bit of the University of Colorado, be a general assignment reporter. Wherever we could use you, you'll fill in. I'm like, great. I was all excited. It was 2+ years, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of rejection letters. I was all fired up about it. And I remember he pulled me up to the old Stapleton Airport and went to drop me off. And I said, oh, by the way, how much money am I going to be making? And he goes, $22,000 a year. And I go, $22,000 a year? And he said, is that okay? And I said, I'm rich. And he said, you got a lot to learn. Because I didn't realize when I flew back out to Colorado a couple of days later to move there permanently, that $22,000, I went and rented an apartment. I leased a car. And all of a sudden, I didn't have much money left over to go live the rest of my life.
Yeah, that was paycheck to paycheck. I can only imagine. So
Yep.
I think people now, certainly people know you from ESPN. I imagine if you get stopped on the streets, you probably see people that say that all the time. I'm sure there are people that recall your days at the NFL Network, which we'll get to in just a bit. But a huge chapter of your professional career was being in Denver as you end up covering the Broncos and being in the city for 15 years, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe even longer than that, but at least 15 years, Shefty. What was that experience like? And what do you think were some of the things that you learned as a beat reporter, amongst other things, that
Yeah.
maybe led you to where you are today? Because for people that aren't familiar, we're in just a little bit of a different era now than we were when you were submitting articles for deadlines to be printed and read the next morning in the newspaper.
There's so much about that that was so formative to me, just like with you, Field, working for the football teams that you did, with the relationships that you had. Those years and those people, I believe, helped shape you into the outstanding man that you are today. And I had the chance to move to Colorado. I'm 23 years old, didn't know anybody. And so, literally, I poured my life into living and working out of the Denver Broncos training facility. And so, it wasn't even like I wanted to do that, because it was a couple of years later that Colorado got a baseball team, and I only wanted to be the baseball beat writer, and I applied for that job. And I remember one of my neighbors down the street who lived on my street, same side of the street, Milwaukee Street in Colorado. He also applied, and they went with an established baseball beat writer by the name of Tracy Ringlesby, who wanted to bring in his own baseball reporter, experienced baseball reporter that he knew and worked with by the name of Jack Etkin. And so me and my friend up the street got rejected. They didn't take us. And my friend, he left the paper to go on to work for the Los Angeles Times, where he won a Pulitzer Prize, and then he wrote some books with Andre Agassi and Phil Knight, and wrote a best-selling book called The Tender Bar. J.R. Moringer went on to write the story with Prince Harry. Like, he's done okay for himself since the Rocky Mountain News rejected him from the baseball beat writing job, and I was forced to stay on the football beat and cover the Denver Broncos. Now, that's how young and stupid and dumb I was. I wanted to leave covering the Denver Broncos to go cover the Colorado Rockies. Like, I would have given anything to do that. And instead, like I said, I was forced to stay on the Broncos beat, where, oh, by the way, they would wound up hiring a guy by the name of Mike Shanahan, and they won back-to-back Super Bowls. I got to write a book with Terrell Davis. I got to write a book with Mike Shanahan. I got to be around one football team for almost 16 years, spent a lot of time with the man that owned the Denver Broncos, Pat Bowlen. And I watched all these people, and basically I lived around them, because I was there so often. And at training camp, it was so different. You live in the dorms with them. You'd have breakfast, lunch, and dinner with them. You were around the team. And I always tell people, I got my undergraduate degree from Michigan. I got my graduate degree from Northwestern. I got my master's degree in the National Football League from the Denver Broncos, and all the great people that I got to be around who were so generous, and hospitable, and were willing to basically put up with me and teach me how the National Football League worked. Because that kind of access doesn't exist today, as we know. It's much more impersonal than it is personal. And back when I covered that team and the NFL, it was much more personal. And I was fortunate that I was able to build a lot of relationships, that carried over to this day. And so I think it's harder to build up some of those relationships today. And I got to be around some incredible people that worked for that team, that played for that team, that coached with that team, people I'm still friendly with to this day. I'm grateful because they were very patient and understanding when I was screwing up things and learning what you couldn't do, and learning the ins and outs of a beat. So, like I said, I got my master's from the Denver Broncos, um, and it was tremendous. And that city, Denver, is in my soul. I loved it there. Love living there. I left there in 2006, and unfortunately, never went back. But I wound up moving to New York, and I met the woman I married, who was from Long Island, whose family was on Long Island, and so here we are back in New York again. And I wasn't going to leave New York as much as I loved Colorado.
And I do recall, or I was thinking about asking you, Shefty, how do you, and I am fortunate to know a little bit about this myself, but I think there are probably a lot of people that would want to know, to you, how do you develop a relationship that leads to somebody becoming a source? Because you hold a lot of information at your fingertips, or maybe at one of, or both your two phones. I think you kind of dove into that, though, in describing the proximity you had to that organization that really doesn't exist anymore. But I think something that I would imagine most people also want to know is, what's that feeling like? Because there are probably things that you have, I know this for a fact, you have learned things throughout your years covering the NFL, either in Denver or at the NFL Network or now at ESPN, that you will take with you to the grave. What's that like managing sort of the balance? Because there are people that have the capacity to tell you things that would be very newsworthy if you made them public, but you are also perpetually maintaining trust. How does that dynamic work for you? Because I know
Yeah.
there are a lot of people that if they got information that could help advance their own career, they'd fire it off in one tweet as fast as they possibly could.
Well, it's a balancing act. And again, I always want to serve our viewers and our readers. And I want to give them as much information as I can. But there's also a certain um, timing issue. Like sometimes things just aren't ready, like they're in the works, like things could be happening, but things fizzle out. So you have to kind of wait till you know what's happening, till a situation's ready. It's a hard thing to describe other than, you go through it enough over 35 years that you'd like to think that, when you can report on something when it's the right time. Um, I love information and I love dispensing information. Um, but you also have to make sure it's going to be right. And a lot of times things change. A lot of times things are fluid. So there's a whole process to it. It's a hard question to answer because there's no right or wrong answer to it.
Well, I
But
remember when I was getting into this, chef, that you told me, and remember this vividly, is there are situations where doing play by play can be useful, right? There are also situations where you want, and this was the term that you use, you want the whole enchilada, right? Um, if a player is going to sign a contract, it either happens or it doesn't happen,
right,
right? And so, hey, now, hey, tweeting, oh,
they're making
the
progress.
or making
So
progress, or
what?
so
Right?
what?
They,
They could
they
right.
it
They could
might
lose
not the
that
next
progress.
day, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Let's wait until we know that it's at a critical point, and then you can go from there, right? So that's sort of how it works to me.
Because there's a subjective side to these things too, right? They've made a competitive offer. What does competitive mean? Who's defining it as competitive? The person making the offer or the person receiving the offer? There's a lot of nuance to it. But I think if I've learned something from you, it's that, trust is very, very, very difficult to gain, but very easy to lose. And uh, actually disseminating information is a difficult thing. It might seem more difficult than people realize. So you
The
start.
trust, the trust of any individual is more important than being out front on a individual story, right? And so I'd like to think that over 35 years that the people that I have relationships know that about me and that they know that I'm going to report it at the right time. Not before, not after, the right time. And again, you come to understand when you can and can't do certain things. So that's sort of where we're at with that. But it is a process, and every situation is unique, and every story is different. And maybe there might be a time where you want to get out front. Hey, you know, Dallas just weighed in with an offer to Dak Prescott, and they want to jumpstart talks. Like that might be a story, but it might not. You just have to see. Every situation is different.
You mentioned 35 years, which you don't look like somebody that's been in the business for 35 years, but that's a long time. So I'm sort of stating something as opposed to asking something here. But there are a lot of young people that want to get to the top as fast as they possibly can. I think some of that's a byproduct of the era that we are in.
Mm-hmm.
I'll call it the social media era. But just a reminder out there, Adam Schefter did not become Adam Schefter overnight. I wanted to ask you though about this era. As I mentioned, I've heard stories from you about you filing columns with like an idea of a move the Denver Broncos might make and having to wait until the next morning to confirm that you were the only person reporting that, right?
Yeah,
Because for
yeah.
all you know, your competition may or hopefully did not have that same information. We're in a new world now where the minute you get something that is reportable, you snap your fingers and however many characters you're allowed to tweet these days, you can get it out there. How has that changed your day to day as opposed to when you were writing at the newspapers?
It's a really interesting question, Field. And I would say that I think you always live with this job. It becomes a part of you. But I think it's even more so now. Like I've talked with Adrian Wojnarowski, who's a legend in the basketball reporting industry, where there have been many instances in which I'm waiting on something to happen and I feel like I can't shower without being away from my phone. So I'll get in the shower and I'll position my phone like on the bathtub handle so that I could see any text that pops in instantaneously. So I could just jump out of the shower while I'm rushing to shower and not lose out on any time on a story that is breaking. Like, that's sort of the world we're living in. Whereas back in my Rocky Mountain News and Denver Post days, you transmit a story to the newspaper on your laptop. It wasn't emailed. There was no email then. It wasn't texted. There was no texting then. You would transmit it through some way, like and this funky noise would come on. It would sound like a fax. The story would go into the system. They'd have the story. And then it would show up in the newspaper the very next morning. Now, there were so many mornings where I would be laying in bed and I would wait to hear the thump of the newspaper at 5:30 in the morning and like snap up like a dog, like Pavlov's dog. Oh, the newspaper. Let me go get the other rival newspaper and let me see what they have. And you'd peel back the pages and like look, like praying, please don't let them have that the Denver Broncos traded John Elway. Like, that would be your worst nightmare, that you got beat on Denver making a giant move. And I also learned what it was like to get a story and have that sit in the newspaper for 24 hours. And now you get a big story. And by the way, like, within seconds, moments, everybody else is reporting it too. Or there's another story coming down the pike in another hour or two. Like, the news cycle is so fast and furious that it's hard to describe. So it's just everything is on steroids in terms of the speed at which it happens. Everything moves faster than ever before. Look, it's like the difference. How do you get it's like comparing the day and age when you got your information from a newspaper compared to when you get it on your phone or on the internet or whatever it is. Like, it's a different world for everybody, the way they consume information, the way we process information, the way we report information. So I'm just a part of that world. My job is tied to that. And so I just think it's made the job more of the relentless variety than it has ever been before. But this is not new. Like, this has just happened. So the news cycle and everything has been sped up, and the pressure is greater than ever before. Uh,
I
it's
can
just
imagine.
that's the job, right?
Yeah, it is. Well, you and Tom Brady, two great Michigan men. A fun fact: Adam has both caught a touchdown pass and intercepted Tom Brady. The best buddies game. I believe Guy Fieri was on the mic the night that one took place as the MC. Those are some great highlights there. But he often talked about how his favorite ring was the next one, right? And
Yeah,
maybe your favorite story is
the
the
next
next
one.
one as well. But I do wonder, and there have been, well, I'm sure there are, thousands you've forgotten by now. But do you reflect upon one? And you don't strike me. I know this. You're not the kind of person that sits there and thinks about how great you have done in this profession. You are focused on sort of where your feet are. But if you were to take a moment and think back, is there a story, maybe at the local level, national level, where you thought to yourself, that helped kind of stamp me as amongst the football voices that people needed to read or follow or watch on TV?
Yeah, I don't think that. I really don't. Like, I think back on certain stories that are more fun and enjoyable and memorable to me, but I don't know that they made a difference in me advancing in the profession. Like, I can remember when the Denver Broncos traded Clinton Portis. I had talked to people in the organization about it. Do you remember the game? I don't know if you remember this, Phil. You may have been like a little boy at that point, but he ran for like 218 yards and 5 touchdowns against the Chiefs. And I think it might have been his second year in the league. And I remember talking to some people in the Broncos organization the next day, and they're like, what would you think if we traded Clinton Portis? I'm like, oh boy. And so I said, well, it's interesting because Washington's looking for a running back and Dallas is looking for a running back. And Washington has, Champ Bailey in a unsettled situation. That might be something there. And if Washington doesn't give him up or give you what you want, then you could always say Dallas is interested. Well, long story short, I had a feeling that trade was coming. I could tell, it started coming together. And I didn't want to jump the gun, but it was different age. Like, so what year would this have been? The early 2000s. So over 20 years ago, roughly. And so like I was getting antsy, like I was getting worried that people were going to know. So I remember writing a column on a Sunday, the week of the combine, when there was starting to be some chatter about it, that the Denver Broncos should consider trading Clinton Portis for Champ Bailey on a Sunday. And I flew back to Denver that day, and I remember Bobby Turner, the Broncos running backs coach at the time, who's now the running backs coach with the 49ers. He was on my plane, and we got into the monorail together in Denver, and he gets the newspaper, and he's looking down, and he's looking at the article, and he looks at me. He's looking at the article, and he looks at me, and he goes, "Where do you come up with this shit from?" And the very next day, the Broncos made the trade.
That's unbelievable.
Portis Champ Bailey.
That, and by the way, think about a deal that was, I got to imagine that was, in the court of public opinion, a very controversial trade, which, think about what a team would be applauded for today if they traded a running back for an all-pro, eventual Hall of Fame cornerback like
and
James
a second-round
Bailey.
draft pick. And that second-round draft pick was because Denver said, no problem, we'll trade him to Dallas. No, Washington said, no, let's not do that. We'll give you that extra 2 who they used on Tatum Bell at the time.
Wow, so Tatum Bell ended up having a little run for them. Yeah,
they got Champ Bailey and Tatum Bell for Clinton Portis, who was great in Washington. And Clinton, he talks about that, because I remember talking to him at the Pro Bowl that year and having an idea this was coming. And he felt like, I don't know, like he made some comments that might have been construed that maybe contributed to him getting, but he knew that I knew stuff that was going on. He knew, and he's talked about it subsequently. So just the whole thing. Again, did that make a difference in me getting ahead? No, I didn't get hired by the NFL Network for a few more years, but it was something that I'll always remember, the dynamics and how that played out and how I waited, and I felt like I couldn't wait anymore and I had to put something out, but I couldn't put everything out. So I put out something and people thought it was crazy, and then it happened.
Yeah. That's an amazing one right there. And I don't care whether you're writing for yourself or for the biggest publication on the planet. To forecast that kind of trade is a big one. All right, Schefter, I want to be mindful of your time, but I wanted to see, and I don't know if you know the answer, maybe you can even take a guess. Do you have a rough estimate? I'll get you out of here on this, of how many numbers you have in your phones. Like, do you have a general sense? There's got to be, are we talking 10,000 contacts now?
Field, it's very simple. You could just go to the bottom, right, and just press the number icon or whatever it is, right? The number symbol.
Yep.
And so when we do that, it says 16,411.
Wow.
It does say 2,575 duplicates found. So if you want to subtract 2,575 from 16,411. That would be the number. Now, I tried to merge the duplicates.
Yep.
So what's 16,411 minus 2,575? There's your answer.
So call it, that's about, if I can do my math fast, like almost 14,000 contacts. That's amazing right there. I sure do. Yeah. I just opened up my phone and I consider myself to be a fairly high volume contact person. I have 2,729. That includes duplicates. So I only have about 1/8 of the numbers that you do. And I consider myself to have a lot of phone numbers.
Well, Field, how many years have you been in the business for?
This is my 12th year at ESPN. So I got a long ways to go to catch up to you.
12th year. Right. This is my 35th year. Yeah. So I've done this 3 times as long as you. So you have how many contacts?
2,729.
Okay, so if you multiply that by 3, you'd be close to me, and we'd be in a similar category. So when you do this for 24 more years or whatever it is, or 22 more years, then you'll be approaching whatever that number is. 16,411 minus 16,411 minus 2. 16,411 minus 2,575 equals 13,836. 13,836.
That's amazing.
So, but you have to understand also, Field, you got married at a young age, and I also was dating a lot of women in Denver, before I moved to New York. So probably got 1,000, numbers that probably could be disqualified pretty quickly.
Well, but you also probably get a lot of unsolicited texts now. I'm sure and I can only imagine how many pieces of information people have sent your way that have proven to be complete BS. But in your role, you probably have to vet most of them out. Adam Schefter, the man who so many people know, as I mentioned, from his football reporting, but hopefully feel like they know on a much deeper level now. Thank you for your time. I'm not sure anybody has less of it available. So I appreciate you tremendously. And I can't wait to see you sometime soon. From the time that you and I are having this conversation, Shefty, we're about 72 hours away from a tea time. You, me, and two friends. I can't wait for it.
Yeah, this is the first year you've done that, right, with us? Because
Yeah.
I've taken a few producers out golfing every year. We do it every year, and this year Big Red couldn't do it, so we had an open slot. So we were only too happy to include you. So it continues the annual tradition of going golfing once. We usually do it earlier.
Yeah.
I don't know why we didn't, but it just so happened that this is how it played out. So we will have a great tea time, a great golf outing on Thursday. I'm looking forward to that. And you've never played this course, right?
Never play this course, but I'm hoping those royalties from the longest yard can afford however many balls I lose, because it's usually a pretty good number.
Well, it'll be a fun day. It'll be a great day for all of us. Hopefully it'll be a quiet day for all of us. And I appreciate you having me today on the Roback Media House. I don't know how many interviews you're on to this in the Roback Media House, but it's an honor to be included and for people to hear how you become an overnight success.
Oh, I'm not sure about overnight, but I appreciate you so much, Shefty. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you for having me, Field.
I love any chance I get to catch up with Adam Schefter, and the Field Talk podcast was no exception. Love the Clinton Portis trade story. It's amazing how much information that man had, and also how much he had to sit on during the newspaper era. But I also thought there were some really important lessons that I know I will take to heart. For as successful as Adam Schefter is, he's a good reminder that hard work, persistence, and being willing to be told that you're just not cut out for this job right now can be really important keys to success, as he turned all those rejection letters into determination and eventually to breaking news stories left and right. But for as prolific of a reporter as Adam Schefter is, I'll say this, until my time on this earth comes to an end, he's a way better person and somebody that I'm incredibly grateful to be a teammate and a friend to, the great Adam Schefter. If you enjoyed this conversation, we hope that you continue to check out more episodes of the Field Talk podcast, which you can get wherever you find your podcasts. Be sure to subscribe to the feed. We love a good rating as well. Reviews are important to us. We want to hear what you want to hear more of. And a big thanks, of course, as always, to Roback for helping us put together the Field Talk podcast. Head on over to roback.com. That's RHOBACK for all the best apparel. Till the next time here on the Field Talk podcast, we'll see you soon.